Welcome to the Feisty Women's Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Gross, Ironman champion, PhD in women's history, and founder and CEO of Feisty Media. I started this show because I wanted to cut through the BS of diet culture and fitness culture and actually learn from high-achieving women at the top of their game who have figured out how to feel and perform their best at every stage of life. So I chat with experts, elite athletes, and leaders who have learned to succeed despite the massive gender data gap in exercise and medical science and product development. Every episode is filled with information, advice, and anecdotes that will help you fulfill your potential as an athlete, mom, leader, or business owner. And listen up. If you don't subscribe to our Women's Performance newsletter, you are definitely missing out. It's totally free. So head over to womensperformance.com and subscribe now. That's womensperformance.com. This podcast is a production of Feisty Media. Hi, Feistias. Okay, for some of you, this might be a long-awaited episode because I've been teasing it out on my social media for a few weeks. But today is the day that I am talking to Christine Yu, who is the author of Up to Speed, The Groundbreaking Science of Women Athletes. And essentially, the book basically takes stock. Like, it does what all of us female athletes and active women are needing right now, which is cutting through the bullshit to figure out what is the real science, what is the good advice, how much do we actually know about female athletic performance, or even exercise physiology as it relates to female physiology, and what do we not know and therefore can ignore all the terrible ads we get on Instagram. So Christine set out to essentially take stock of the science and writes very much in a very readable format what it is that we need to know. Christine is also an award-winning journalist. She writes about sports science and health. She loves storytelling about the intersection of sports science and women athletes. Her features, profiles, and essays have appeared in the Washington Post, Outside Magazine, Runner's World, Family Circle, Self, Eating Well, Vice, and ESPNW, amongst others. Christine and I talked not only about the book itself, but about the process of writing and the things that surprised her the most, the things that made her angry, as well as the things that she's looking forward to the most, having done this kind of stock taking on where we're at in terms of the science of women's performance. The book is available on May 16th, which I believe is the day after this podcast is released. And it's available anywhere you can buy books. I know you can also pre-order if you can't wait, or you have a terrible memory like me and you think, I will not remember this tomorrow, then go to Amazon right now. You can pre-order and it will be delivered to your door. So I hope you all enjoy this wonderful conversation with Christine. Good morning, Christine. How are you?
I'm good, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here. The book, Up to Speed, The Groundbreaking Science of Women Athletes. I've spent most of the week kind of looking through it, trying to read as much as I can in the few days I've had it. But when can folks, I have my copy, but when can folks start to buy it?
Yeah, so it comes out May 16th.
Okay, so pretty soon. So this episode, I believe, will come out on Monday, whatever next Monday is. So they'll be able to buy it pretty quickly after that. Cool. And what I found really is that the book is kind of a well-needed summary of where sports science is today in terms of female physiology. And that's something that at Feisty, we also try to cut through a lot of the BS because there's a lot of crappy information in the women's health and wellness space. Did you find that as you were doing your research that you had to cut through some crappy research or maybe some information that we have as women that's not so great?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what you just said is really the reason why I wanted to write the book too, is because there is such wide variety of information, right? But more than that, I feel like we get fixated on specific ideas or conditions, say like the female athlete triad, or oh my gosh, women, suffer from ACL tears more than men. But it felt like we kept cycling through these same issues over and over and over again, and we were never really getting anywhere with that. And it made me think like, well, why is why is this happening? First of all, right, to women and active girls. But more than that is I really want to try to bring together all of these topics almost under one umbrella, if you will, right? Because like you said, there isn't really a good resource out there. I think, Stacey Sims did such an amazing job with Roar to really bring all of these issues to the surface, but it's often felt like it's Stacey's book, right? Like, and there, that's it. So wanting to try to help expand that conversation a little bit more and look at what is it that we do know? What is it that we don't know? And 100%, there's the quality, there's a lot of really interesting research out there. There's a lot of incredible scientists who are doing good work. But there is a lot of difference in quality of those studies too, in large part, I think, because it's still a really young field and we're still trying to figure out a lot of these things in terms of methodology and protocols and definitions and all of this stuff, right? That then makes these studies comparable, from one to the next, so that we can then draw some conclusions.
Yeah. Did you have a moment? I can remember I had a very specific moment where someone told me about the book Roar, where it was like with Stacey's book, where it was like, okay, oh, actually, we can look at female performance from the specific lens of female physiology, and we haven't done it. We haven't done it very much in the past. Did you have a specific moment where you kind of had like an aha, like, oh, this is missing?
Yeah. So I remember it was back in, I want to say 2013 or 2014. I was at this event. It was a women's magazine event. And I think it was like a fitness magazine thing. And they had like brands, right? And like demos, and they also had panels. And so one of the panels that they had, or one of the speakers that they had, was, I believe it was Dr. Jennifer Ashton, who's, a physician here in New York. And she was talking about the female athlete triad. And this was like really the first time that I heard someone like name it, right? Growing up, I'd always heard about, oh, if you don't get your period, that means you're training hard, you're really fit. I also, know so many folks who have struggled with eating disorders and disordered eating, right? But never understood the connection between those things, and then how that could affect bone health, like not only in the present, but future bone health and cardiovascular health and all these other things. And it just, like, it was one of those moments where I just kind of stopped and was like, wait, what? Like, why don't we know this? Like, why don't we know why this is important? And it seems like this is something that, as a teenager, right, would have maybe been helpful to know, and maybe would have, like, I don't know, I would like to think that it might have altered how I approached, sports and nutrition and just things in general, if I knew how everything, not how everything, but just how some things work together and everything was linked, right? Rather than just thinking of, oh, my period and my cycle are just this thing off in the corner that only comes into play because I don't want to get pregnant right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I found the history chapter to be really interesting. Like, I did my PhD in ancient history, women's history specifically, so completely different. But like, you mentioned Elizabeth Drinkwater and that original research on the female athlete triad, but it was funny to learn like that prior to that there had been like almost no research, and then just like these couple women in the 1800s, the late 1800s, who had done this research around like around like, oh, well, wait, do we really need to rest during our period? Like, why did we assume that? Were you surprised when you wrote that chapter?
Oh, 100%. And I will say, like, it is very likely too that I've missed stuff in between, or it is very, I'm almost positive, right, that there have been amazing women and other scientists who have been looking at this. But one of the things that chapter really brought out to me too is thinking about who has the platform to disseminate this information, right? Whether that's in books or scientific journals, because that's the way that information gets out. And I believe it was like one of the sports historians that I spoke with, or someone else in the sports science who has been in the sports science field for a long time. She was telling me, yeah, there are a lot of incredible women scientists and researchers that have been involved in sports science, but they're not like necessarily the head of the labs, or if they talk about their findings or they talk about stuff like in meetings where you're not necessarily documenting those things, right? And that affects who we pay attention to, who we think of. So there is a likelihood that we've also lost a lot of information because of, I guess, if you want to say like more like women, the way women kind of talk and disseminate information versus like the more formal meeting structure and minutes and papers and stuff that go into, the formal confines of like sports science as a field, as a research thing, institute. But anyhow, back to your question, it was surprising to me. It was surprising and it wasn't, right? In the sense that, of course, men kind of given their bias, they're going to be looking at things as to why women can't do things because women's bodies are different from theirs. Mm-hmm. If the world and sports and science in particular is created in this mold of men, if you will, right? If men are considered the standard, then of course they're going to look at anything that's different from men as like what's wrong in a way, right? So in that sense, it doesn't surprise me that it was women who were the ones who were going out and saying, no, wait, that's not the case. And let me prove this to you with actual science instead of just your assumptions and biases.
Right. Yeah. It's, one time when I was in Scotland, I was at Stirling University doing their national training center was there. And I tried to be part of a study where they were asking for elite runners. And they had put out like a time that was like, the qualifying time for the study. And it was like fairly swift, but I was a professional athlete. So I went and they told me that they weren't accepting women into the study. Because like our menstrual cycle complicated things,
Yeah.
And like, because I was like, well, why didn't, first of all, I surprised myself because all these years later, I'm like, why was I not more outraged by this? Like, even like I was a feminist, and I still was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Our menstrual cycles are complicated. And then on the flip side, I was also a little bit outraged by the idea that they put this time out that they literally thought no women were going to come into the study. And that's like in our generation, that's only 25 years ago. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, like on the one hand, right, it does make sense in a way with science, just the way, again, that science is structured and the way that it's structured to find answers to these questions through experiments and through laboratory work, right? You do want to minimize as many confounding variables as possible so that you can try to get at, a quote unquote, like true answer, if you will. And yeah, hormones do add noise to that, but, and that is 100%, right? The answer that I get from a lot of researchers when I ask them, like, why haven't we studied women to the same degree as men? And it is because of these fluctuating hormones. But at the same time, I feel like, it's almost become a blanket excuse or an easy way out, if you will, because you can study women and account for the fluctuating hormones, but it takes time. It takes more money. It takes more staff. It takes more planning. And so, yeah, it's easier, right, to do these studies without women.
Yeah. And it sort of makes sense that it's kind of changing now because in order to have that kind of change, because you have this multi-layered exclusion, really, like women have not been part of sports history, have not been part of scientific history, and all of those layers that now we're like, oh, wait, this is important and we value that. Therefore, we will study it.
Yeah.
Right? Were there things, what surprised you the most when you were doing your research?
I think so. I guess two things. One is more kind of like nerdy wonky, if you will, but it is more like
I
on the
love
science.
nerdy wonky.
But it is more on the science side and like the methodology side, because like I say in the book, like I didn't always pay attention to it, right? I was like, why do I need to know how you set up a study? I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to go recreate this. But in looking at the history of how the sports science field kind of came up, it made me realize how that methodology, how that methodology was established from the beginning, right? Is what's then ultimately passed down through generations. And it almost creates this blind spot that we're not even aware that we're excluding people, because this is the way that it's always been done. Because, I don't think that any scientist or any research institution is explicitly not wanting to study women, right? I don't, I hope not.
Right.
I hope it's
Yeah.
not that explicit. But I think that because of the way that the systems were set up and passed down, that it just became the way that we do things. And so when you don't include women from the beginning, it's like you don't really even recognize that you're not including them as time goes on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Did you see those systems as changing, like in this moment in time?
I think so. So, I mean, when I think about it, so, probably one of the more influential sports science laboratories was the Harvard Fatigue Lab, which was founded back in the 1920s. But a lot of the scientists that came out of that lab, went on to become pretty important figures in the sports science field, right? They're kind of leading really interesting and innovative experiments. We were learning a lot from their work. And then these scientists went on to establish their own labs, right? And train their own scientists and their own students. And like I said, there's this trickle-down effect. What I see now is because there are more women being active, and because there are more women going into science and medicine who have grown up being active and athletic people, that they want to know about all of these issues. They're like, they're the ones who are now asking the questions to be like, why aren't we doing this? And we need to know this. And as they come into these positions of power and leadership positions where they can more have a better chance, right, to dictate what those research questions are, kind of what policies might be put in place, I do think we're starting to see some more change in that realm.
As we head into summer, rest and recovery are critical for improving sports performance, reducing stress, and living a long and healthy life. We should all invest in better sleep. So, think about the thing you lay your head on for 8 hours a night. If it's not exactly right for you, it can lead to needless tossing and turning, or worse, have you waking up with an unrelenting kink in your neck. My new Lagoon pillow has helped me improve my sleep immensely by pairing me with the performance pillow that has everything I need. So I personally was matched with the Otter pillow. Shout out to Team Otter, which I love because it has a gentle cooling effect. And I was able to choose how much stuffing I wanted in it, which is super important to me because I'm doing a decent amount of CrossFit these days and my shoulders are kind of creaky. So having a pillow that is stuffed just to the right height keeps my neck and head in exactly the right position and comfortable for the entire night. And as of fall 2023, Lagoon launched their 100% mulberry silk pillowcases. It's cool to the touch, buttery soft, and great for your skin and hair. You've got to go check out this pillowcase if you want to feel great and look great every morning. Waking up for morning workouts has never felt better. I'm refreshed and pain-free thanks to my Lagoon pillow. To check it out for yourself, go to lagoonsleep.com/performance and take the 2-minute sleep quiz to find your perfect pillow match. And then use the code PERFORMANCE for 15% off your first purchase. That's code PERFORMANCE at lagoonsleep.com/performance, whole 15% off, and the link is in the show notes. You can just click through there. Endurance sports should be accessible to everyone, right? That's why we are so excited to be partnering with Motive. Motive is one of the fastest growing training apps in the world today, with thousands of amateur athletes signing up every month and a nearly perfect 4.9 star rating in the App Store. You are not a template, and your training plan should not be either. Prepare for running races, triathlons, cycling events, duathlons, or swim runs, however your season schedule shapes up, and get training written by some of the best coaches in the world in each discipline who know what it takes to help amateur athletes reach their goal on race day. The app takes the training written by those experts and then creates the most optimal training plan for your schedule, abilities, and goals. Plus, the training is fully customized to your race schedule, how much you can train each week, your current abilities, and the goals you want to achieve in your race. You can use the app for free as long as you want, or get all the upgraded features from the app for just $19.99 a month. But as a Feisty listener, you can sign up at mymotive.com and use the code Feisty for 2 months of full premium access. That's right, you get 2 months of premium for free. So you quite literally have nothing to lose. So head over to mymotive.com, mymotiv.com, and use the code Feisty, Feisty. And on a personal note, I know the founder of Motive, and he is driven to make triathlon and all endurance sports more accessible for the athletes who care about their performance but who aren't quite ready for a full-time personal coach. If that sounds like you, definitely try the app for 2 months for free. You literally have nothing to lose. For decades, running shoes have been researched, tested, and designed for men. Brands have relied on the shrink it and pink it approach to sell male shoes to female customers. That's why we are so excited to be working with Hedas. Hedas designs athletic footwear for women that elevates performance, safety, and style. Hedas unlocks the science behind women's biomechanics through dedicated research, creates better shoes for women that support their longevity and performance, and establishes new design standards to promote transparency in a male-biased industry. Hedas have a lower ankle collar to reduce rubbing, a breathable mesh toe box to allow for ventilation and to allow for female toe shape, a special kind of plate in the midsole to keep tired legs going, a narrow heel cup to reduce heel slippage and take the pressure off our Achilles, and a rounded instep to create a snug fit. Hedas has 3 shoe models designed for different sessions: the Alma Cruise for long runs, the Alma Tempo for training days, and the Alma Speed for pushing the pace. I've personally been running in the Alma Cruise and I love them. It's the shoe I always wanted and never knew I needed. The fit is perfect in every way. You can get your own pair of Hedas at hedas.com and use the code Feisty20 for 20% off. That's Feisty20 at hedas.com, and it will all be in the show notes.
Yeah, you know, I've always in my own sport in triathlon, there's always been a huge push for like female participation or more women coming into the sport. And I feel like I've been banging this drum for a really long time, but like yes, we need more female participation in sport, but also we need women like all the way through up into like, you know, from the leadership, coaches, sport science, like all of those places. And then I feel like that's how you end up changing some of those biases, like you just said. Absolutely. And I think we see, at least from my opinion, I think we see something similar too with a lot of the exercise physiology research and the emphasis for women. Again, this is a huge generalization, but like it seems to be a lot about getting women active, right? Getting them to exercise and, you know, for fitness or whatever it is. But then we kind of drop off and sell women short in terms of, okay, that's great. And like, there's so many benefits, right, to being active and to exercising. but then how can we continue to help women stay involved in physical activity and sport? And that might mean everything from progressing up the ladder to become, to perform better, and kind of move up the ranks, if you will. But it's also things like, well, how can we help them not get injured, not get burnt out, like maintain their love and joy of moving their bodies and exercising? How do we make sure that they have gear so that they can not only go out and do the things that they love, but then progress in their sport, right?
Yeah, I see endless opportunity in this realm. Like if you see what I mean,
There's
like
so much.
there's so much, like from the types of businesses you could start that focus on women specific products to like all of the programs in science. Are you an athlete yourself?
Theoretically.
Theoretically.
I mean, I grew up playing sports, like
Yeah.
I feel like every sport under the sun. More recently, I focus more on like running and swimming and surfing and skiing, and some yoga and stuff. So
That sounds like an athlete to me.
dabble. I'm not one to be like, I'm going out and racing all the time or anything like that. I think those days are behind me, but I like being active.
Nice. Are there things that you learned through the research process that you are applying to your own, activity?
Yeah. So I think one thing is, and we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, is the work around kind of as I get older, because I'm in my mid 40s now. My body 100% does not respond to at the same way as it did in my 20s and 30s. I feel like my endurance is, kind of slipping. I'm for sure feel like I'm, can see muscle mass like deteriorating before my eyes and stuff like that. So I think for me, one of the biggest shifts is understanding that this is my body that's changed. Like my body literally is changing, right? And so that means that how it adapts to training, how it feels when I'm exercising is going to be different. And so that means that I need to adjust how I approach it rather than continuing to bang my head against the wall and keep trying to do more, right? Because that's obviously not doing any service for my body as it is right now. So it is switching things up in terms of, making sure that I am lifting weights and lifting heavier weights than I may have in the past. It's trying to, as much as, I love plodding around the park and like my like long, slow runs, like recognizing that maybe I need to be doing some other, working in at least some like high intensity or changing the intensity of that from time to time, because like my body and my muscles need that stimulus in which it's not getting in other places now.
Yeah. I was happy. This is what we talked about before the show. I was very happy to see that you talked to Celine Yeager, who hosts our Hit Play Not Pause podcast and our Feisty Menopause. And she's really the leader of our Feisty Menopause community. How much did you know about, sounds like you're having some symptoms of perimenopause. I'm there too. How much did you know about perimenopause before you did this research?
Very little.
It's crazy, isn't it?
It's kind of bananas because I kind of think of it a little bit in the same way as kind of postpartum period. Like we don't talk about any of it. And I remember having my first kid and being like, what in God's name is going on? Like, why didn't anyone tell me any of this? Like, why didn't anyone give me a heads up that this is going to happen? And this is how my body's going to feel. And it's not all sunshine and flowers and smiley sleeping babies and stuff like that. And so I kind of feel like that's the same approaching perimenopause. And especially because the symptoms are so all over the place for everyone. Like it's not just hot flashes and, night sweats and stuff and, weight gain and stuff like that. But it literally feels like it could be anything under the sun. And so it's really confusing when your body starts to feel like something's off, something's different. It doesn't feel like myself anymore. Like as people who are active and who as athletes, we are so attuned to how our bodies feel. And that can be so disorienting when it doesn't line up, right? And you can't quite figure out why.
Yeah, I also, I know that exercise in my life partially functions as like kind of like mood control,
Yeah.
and like it's kind of part of my basic, like I eat, I sleep, I exercise, and when I couldn't have the same intensity, or when I was started to have like symptoms of perimenopause and I just wasn't able to like go hard, it affected like everything started to spiral, and I've never heard that before, right? Or I didn't really realize anything. I didn't know anything besides hot flashes, and that your period stops, before we started the Feisty Menopause brand 2.5 years ago, which is really wild when you think about it. And I love what you said too about postpartum, about your I think it was something in the book about your family kind of smiling and like, and not necessarily like telling you what was going to happen. And I felt the same way. Like, you know what? I just went through trauma and nobody told me that was going to happen. And now I'm
Nobody told
recovering from
me.
it. Yeah, it's crazy.
Exactly. Well, and I mean, what you said too about just menopause, like the other thing that struck me is like how long this perimenopause period
Right.
can be. I want to, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's somewhere between, like it could potentially last between 5 and 10 years. I'm like, what? Like, what does that even mean? Right? Like we don't recognize that this, it's a normal part of our lives, right? But yet we're not allowed to voice it, and to share our concerns about it, to talk about what we're experiencing, and just expected to kind of get on with it and operate as if everything's normal.
Yeah. If you were to summarize maybe 3 or 4 points that would be like good take homes from your research that you think like all women should know, based on where we're at currently with the sports science, what would you tell people?
Yeah. So I think one thing is that there, 100% are physiological reasons, right, for why we feel the way we do, why we adapt to training or don't adapt to training. But we are not just our hormones or just our muscle mass or just our VO2 max or anything like that. We are messy human beings that are living within a larger context around us. And so for me, this really hit home when I was doing research around for the injury chapter, because I'm so prone to injury. I feel like I'm constantly injured. I'm, currently like nursing my 3rd ACL tear, which is super fun.
Oh, wow.
But for me, it's always been that narrative that there's something wrong with my body and there's something wrong. It's not meant to do these sports, or it's not meant to be active, or I'm frail or fragile in some way. But when I was doing this research is, sure, as doctors and researchers are trying to understand injury risk and prevention, of course, they're going to be looking at factors, right, internal to a person's body that might put them at risk. So it's like genetics, it is some physiological or anatomical things, biomechanics, that type of thing. But what I think we don't always give enough credence to is the external factors around that too. So one of the most interesting research that I came across was when, so talking about ACL tear, since that is so personal to me right now, the statistic is that 8 women are 2 to 8 times more prone to an ACL tear than men, right? And so the reason often given is because, well, we have wider hips,
the
and so
Q
that
angle thing,
angle, right? And so that puts too much stress. And then the other one is that, with the hormonal fluctuations with the menstrual cycle, at certain points in the cycle, the ligaments become more lax. So maybe, you are potentially more prone to injury at that point. But when researchers looked at dancers, right? Dancers are jumping and leaping and landing on one foot, just like soccer players and basketball players, and other folks. And yet there isn't that same disparity in knee injuries among dancers as there are in these other sports. And so they wondered why. So they did this experiment in which they looked at male and female dancers as well as male and female team sports athletes. They had them stand on like a tall box on one foot and then drop down and land on one foot. And then they watched how they managed that, right? Like what kind of strategies they used to support their landing. So with both groups of dancers, so boys and girls, the male and female dancers and the male team sports athletes, they all use similar landing strategies when they land to minimize the knee wobble or the wobble at the hip and at the knee, right? So that they are more stable when they landed. The female team sports players didn't do that. There was a lot more instability at both the knee and the hip, like the knee fell in, which is, one of the red flags for knee injury. So anyhow, it just begged the question of, is it just our bodies? Or could it be that a lot of these dancers have been dancing since they were young, have been taught how to use their bodies and how to land safely? Could it be, this idea of early exposure to sport? Mm-hmm. And then in the same way, we often think of muscle mass as being, a potential risk factor. So boys and men have more muscle mass. So, that makes them more resilient to injury. But are girls and women being encouraged to go into the weight room and to lift in the same way? Again, at an earlier age, like at the high school level, and, even I know it happens more in college, but, if you're thinking about the high school level, when kids are growing so much, they're going through puberty, that's when the risk spikes. Mm-hmm. Are there other things in the environment that may be influencing how our bodies then perform in sport, if that makes sense?
Totally.
So that long-winded answer, but that's definitely one thing. Cause like, I don't want people to think that, yes, these factors are important and can contribute and can play a role, but they are not the only thing that defines you.
Right. And that multi-layered kind of explanation for what would go into an ACL injury. It's a lot more empowering to think, okay, maybe with the right training or that there's all these different factors. It's not just like the angle of my hips that I'm forever destined to like
and
ACL injury.
Like what can you do about that? Right. Like you can't change that. And then similarly with like hormones, you can't, I guess theoretically you could try to arrange your races or competitions or around that. But if you are playing a team sport, how is that even how does that even work? Right. You can't do that. So it's given these factors. Okay, then what are the other things that we can do around that to help mitigate, some of these potential risks, right? What can we do to give girls and women the support and the resources they need so that, they are capable of performing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny because now that we're talking about this, I think I've had this thought in the back of my head that has never risen to like consciousness, where I read about like the Q angle, the higher likelihood. This goes back years of like female athletes, and it's weird because even at the time I thought, that's weird. Like our physiology is such that our knees don't work as well. Like that just really doesn't make that much sense as like a historical adaptation, like did women not need to be mobile? Like it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to this idea, right? That when you have, when the standard is based on one certain type of person, right? And the research is focused on that specific population of people, it does skew our understanding of what's considered normal physiology or, what's appropriate for sports even, right? And so then when you have something that doesn't match that dominant view, you're always looking for the points of comparison is what, I guess, one way to put it, right? The ways in which it's different, it doesn't match up. And so if you're in that other group, you're always kind of put in this position of kind of less than, right? Like not, how do you measure up to this other thing?
Yeah. Yeah. You seem like someone who's fairly empathetic to like how we ended up where we are now historically in terms of the sports science and women's exclusion. But was there anything that made you angry? as you were researching?
Um, it's funny that you say that because I also have a bunch of doctors in my family, my sister in particular. And so when I talk to her about this, her reaction is, it's not the doctor's fault. Like it's,
Right.
she's like, it's not our fault. We're trying to do our best. And I'm like, yes, I understand. So I feel like I overcorrect sometimes in that direction, but it is like trying to understand what is the environment in which we're working in. In terms of anger, I mean, honestly, I think the things that really made me mad were also the arguments that have been brought up for why women aren't suited to do competitive sports or vigorous physical activity, right? So I mean, you mentioned a little bit, but things like, well, the menstrual cycle. So if you do physical activity, it's going to sap all your vital energy. And if you don't have this energy, it's going to like ruin your reproductive system. And then, oh my gosh, you can't have babies. But using those reasons for why women couldn't compete. And, there are so many examples of it in which that bias comes out, but then women are blamed because of their bodies. So, for example, there was a Danish swimmer, Greta Anderson, who, was, I mean, I think it was, she was swimming the 100 free, or, she was a freestylist and like, she was like the best in the world. But she was supposed to get her period on like during one of the heats during the Olympics. Mm-hmm. So the team doctor gave her an injection. I remember this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Gave her an injection to like put off her period basically. But then she swam her heat. She was expected to win the gold, but she swam her heat halfway through sometime. She like essentially blacked out and like sunk to the bottom of the pool. And, this like Hungarian water polo player like had to dive it, like saw her because no one else was paying attention, saw her, like dove in and like rescued her. But because of that, obviously she didn't get to finish her heat. She didn't get to go on to swim in the finals. But then the team thought it was a liability. So then didn't put her in the relay or put her not anchoring the relay, like put her in like the second position or something like that. But she was like blamed for that because of her body. Whereas like, who knows what kind of medication,
what got injected into her.
Yeah. But then, so it's like things like that. And then even the fact that it wasn't until the 2014 Olympics that women were able to compete in the ski jump because they thought their uterus would burst because of the impact of the landing. And I'm like, really? Like it's it's just kind of
Sorry, it's funny.
It's funny, and it's not surprising in so many ways, but it's also right, like infuriating. Like,
yeah,
what worlds do we live on, right?
Yeah, I think sometimes I laugh because otherwise I would cry.
Yeah,
it's funny, but it is like that thing about that belief that it would affect our like if we did sport, it would affect our reproductive system, that our uterus would literally fall out, like that. The fact that like actually we believe that, people believe that into like the 1960s and even 1970s, you'd hear that. That's like, it's funny, but like when you let it sink in, oh my God. And then that was used as a reason to exclude us from a physical activity.
Absolutely. And it's just, it's just not surprising, but like infuriating to me, enraging, right? In terms of just how easily it is to discount women simply because our bodies are different from men.
Yeah. And you talked a little bit in your conclusion about like kind of the knock-on effect, because sometimes we see sports science as something that's like happening on this really high level with elite athletes and doesn't affect like everyday people. But I think really it does, like really the exclusion or now inclusion of women into sports science has that knock-on effect to everyone. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that, it is, I think traditionally, right, like you said, sports science has been this realm of the elite performer and, the Olympian, and its relevance really didn't apply to me, right, as a normal amateur athlete. But I think that especially now in this day and age with social media too, that I think everyone uses professional athletes too as their model for what they should be doing and how they should be training. And there's a million, right? There's a million kind of problems with that in and of itself. But I think that as we start to include more women and more diverse population of people into research, it really does help us, like I said, expand that notion of what's considered normal physiology, because right now that really is only based on half the population of the world. It doesn't obviously include women, but it's also based on a population that it lives in westernized countries for the most part. So I think that as we start to include more diverse participants and our understanding expands, then we can provide better on-ramps for people, like I said, not only to into physical activity, but to help them stay there. Because when you don't have research that reflects you or your lived experience, you're left without appropriate or adequate guidance, right? In terms of nutrition and training, injury prevention, even clothing and gear. And again, this affects all levels of sport. And if you don't have those things to support you, then you start to wonder, well, is this really for me? Like, do I even have a place here? Who is sport and physical activity supposed to be for if they're not considering, me or my lived experience? And that, that 100% affects who does and does not then be active and be athletic and have these performance goals, right? If we talk about how we want sports to be more inclusive, how sports is great for everyone, how physical activity and exercise is great for everyone, then what are we doing to make sure that we are supporting people at all levels of this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was also struck by that it takes, is it 17 years for something that, for something that science finds to be accurate to sort of disseminate down to like the average person.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, yeah, so it's on average, and I don't believe that this is specific to sports science, but just on average, that it takes about 17 years for, something to be translated into clinical practice. And, that's essentially a grown child, right?
Right.
And, and I think that just highlights how frustrating science can be sometimes because it is so slow. And again, just the nature of which science operates. And especially within medical settings, you need evidence base, like a robust evidence base, in order to then have guidelines that you feel are, concrete and solid, and you have the research to back it up. But in order to build that evidence base, it takes time, because these, it's asking one question, validating that question, validating it again, and then asking the next, half a step up question, and then doing, rinse and repeat over and over again. So it's no wonder that it takes so long. So it can be really frustrating for folks who are, just want to know what to do. So like I've been doing some events, early events for the book. And, a lot of the questions I get is around kind of both menopause and older women who are like, what do I do? Like, I don't like, I have osteoporosis. I'm still really active. Like I love this, but I don't know what I should be doing or should be doing better or differently or whatever it is. And it's frustrating that, I can't say, oh, give them guidance or even like point them somewhere where they can get guidance. I think everyone's trying to do their best. But yeah, it's hard. And I think, I try to remind this, I'm like, you're literally at the leading edge of this. Like you are the people who are pushing this forward. You're still doing all the things that you love. But yeah, in terms of something that's science backed for that specific population, yeah, there isn't anything.
Yeah. And it's crazy because especially with perimenopause, menopause, but also even when we look at like the hashtag cycle syncing trend too, of like people coming out with like all this advice that feels like that's where they're so sure, like based off of who knows what, that like, this is how it's supposed to be. This is what you should do. And the reason for that is because they're kind of capitalizing on that feeling that like, we now know as women that we've sort of been excluded and we're looking for answers and we're asking different questions. We don't have those answers yet. So it's sort of like you just said, it's like that willingness to go, okay, yes, like we do know things, we can do things like read your book, and find out what we do know, but then also we're going to be an experiment of one to some extent.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, to your point, right? It demonstrates like there is this hunger, this recognition that we haven't been included and kind of outrage about that. But then there's this hunger of like, well, what then? Right? Like, what can I do then? And I think that, yes, 100%, you see people kind of capitalizing on this and, trying to use what research is available out there right now to kind of push these ideas like cycle syncing. But yeah, it's super frustrating. It's so hard.
Yeah, it is frustrating. And I understand why people want those answers. And at the same time, like, even looking back on my own sports career, I feel like I wish I had just got a bit more serious about learning about myself. It's not even necessarily learning the science or the information, but being able to go, okay, actually, like, like I know I'm someone who, like, in the late luteal phase, I definitely have a couple days that are super flat. Like when when I was training hard for an event, like I could use that information to help increase my training, or decrease it at that time and increase it at other times. But I just, I plowed through, it was kind of like, we didn't want to be seen as weak or mention something about our cycle. So we just were like, nah, we can do anything. Let's go.
And I think that that's like right now there's such a, desire to have that one answer, that one solution. So it's like, if we haven't been studied all this time, then this has to be the reason, right? Why I'm, I might be feeling flat or I'm not achieving my goals, right? And so we're almost looking at this one thing as the solution to all of our problems. Whereas I think, what you said and something that I think is really important, and something else that I hope that people take from this is that we are so individual. And I think, and it's not that, say your menstrual cycle phase is going to be the answer to any one thing, but it's the fact that your menstrual cycle is part of your physiology. It's part of you. So that when you are thinking about your training and you're thinking, if you're a coach, if you're thinking about how do you individualize something for your athlete, which, I hope most coaches are doing, right? Like they're not just giving them a blanket plan, but that's another thing that you just need to account for and consider, right? Because like you said, we all have individual experiences of what our cycle might be, how we might feel during different phases. I might feel super energetic during my late luteal phase, as opposed to you, right? But so those are all factors that need to be accounted for. They're not going to be it's not going to be the solution, just like,
Yeah.
Taking this one supplement is going to be the solution to all of your athletic problems.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking something there that I'm totally blanking on now. But okay, what I wanted to ask you is, what are you, like, coming out of all the work that you did, what are you most excited about?
I'm really just like, honestly, just excited for this book to be out in the world, having worked on it for about 3 years since I started first working on this. Like on the one hand, it's like proof. I'm like, look, I really was working on something. I wasn't lying. Like it does exist in the world. So I'm excited for that. And really just, like I said, just to honestly get this in the hands of readers. And I'm very curious of what people's reactions and feedback is going to be, because I want this to be, I want this to start conversations, right? That's really my hope for this book, is that it's a conversation starter, that we start to think about things, just maybe a little bit differently, or consider other perspectives around this, and what that might mean. Because it is definitely not intended to be, a be all end all prescriptive plan of any sort. It really is trying to disentangle what we know, what we don't know, what that might mean, where we can go from here, what we might be able to do better. And of course, like everyone's individual experience is gonna differ in that. But that's my hope, is that it starts to start some conversations, and potentially that it reflects some different girls and women's experiences as well that they may not have heard in other places. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remembered when I was previously going to mention, we recently launched a course called Fueled, and it's essentially like about fueling for female athletes and active women. But we took like a multidisciplinary approach, and the process, so essentially the first couple modules deal with, so like the history of fueling, like diet culture and that stuff, as well as like mental health things around disordered eating. And then we talk about like exercise physiology for a couple of modules, and then a couple specifically on nutrition. And in my mind, when we were planning this, I was like, this is great. We'll do this multidisciplinary approach. This is what the world needs, you know? And I still believe that to some extent. But like, as we've gone through the process, it's like, it really highlighted, oh, like there's a lot of dots that aren't connected. So we were trying to like through the exercise physiology chapters, like connect some of the things we were saying about sex differences or life stages, or it's exercise specific, like energy needs, connect it to nutrition specific to female athletes. And it was like, oh, like that work hasn't been done. Like there's like, I can see the two dots, but like no one's come along and connected them. Right. And then like as a, you know, and as a company, like we're trying to give good information, not just like my assumptions based on what, like, so it's like just that hope that like, you know, you put that out into the world and that women themselves will. And that I think I see that a lot with like your book, is that people will actually go, oh, okay, this is actually what we know and the ground that we're standing on right now. And like how we move forward might just be like that. It's empowering. It's like, okay, now I know this and I know this and this. And like, how do I connect that for myself?
Yeah. I mean, because definitely one of my fears is that this was going to be really depressing, right? Like, look at all these, you know, bad things that are happening and reasons why we aren't included. But it is my hope that, you know, it does kind of leave on a more like positive or hopeful kind of note about the things that are starting to change, that we can still work on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I'm definitely excited to see what happens. I feel like new studies are coming out all the time. And the next, you know, few years or even a few decades are going to be amazing, I think, for women's sports and this topic.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's exciting to see all the momentum. At some point during the research or during writing this, I had to like put blinders on so that like I stopped looking at new research, because I'm like, I can't can't include any more studies. I can't like look at, you know, anything else at some point. So
yeah, and it's happening fast now. So
yeah,
that is the good news. Yeah,
absolutely.
Great. Well, Christine, where can we buy the book? Where should we buy the book?
Yeah, so the book is out May 16th. It's available as in hardcover, as an ebook, as an audiobook. It's available anywhere books are sold. Obviously, be great, you know, to support your local indie bookstore. And then, yeah, I'm on social media at CYU888 on Instagram and Twitter. Obviously, I picked my handle before I had any thoughts about branding and like what I probably should have as a handle, but that's another story. But yes.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for the work that you've done and all the time you spent kind of taking the temperature on where we're at for women in sports science. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. This is a fun conversation.
Building muscle can be tough, and gains can be so slow, even for those of us who do a lot of strength training. As an ex-endurance athlete who is now in perimenopause, I know this all too well. It can be frustrating to put in the time in the gym and not see the results I'm looking for.
That's why it's super important to take the right supplements at the right time. One of those supplements is essential amino acids, which are needed to trigger muscle protein synthesis. Muscle protein synthesis happens when you eat high-quality protein, like eggs or whey. And by supplementing with additional essential amino acids, you can make sure you are getting the full benefit of your training sessions. Targeted essential amino acid formulas can be up to 4 times more effective than just eating protein. I've been taking amino acids for almost a year, and in combination with eating quality protein and a couple other supplements, I have managed to turn the tides on age-related muscle loss, which starts at 30 for women, by the way, and I have continued to make strength gains as I head towards 50. AminoCo has been a long-time sponsor of Feisty Media and has supported all of our brands and podcasts over the years. I recommend starting with AminoCo Perform, and you can grab some at aminoco.com/performance. If you enter the code PERFORMANCE, you will save 30% and receive a free gift if it is your first purchase. Give it a try and let me know how it goes. That's aminoco.com/performance and use the code PERFORMANCE to save 30%. As a lifelong runner and triathlete turned CrossFitter, I am stoked to announce that the athletic eyewear brand Tifosi Optics has joined us as a partner here at Feisty Media. Tifosi sports glasses hit all the marks for athletes. They're shatterproof polybicarbonate, so the lenses not only reduce glare, but also offer scratch resistance, which I 100% need. They stay in place when you are moving. The hydrophilic rubber nose pads actually get more grippy the more you sweat, so they are secure and don't slide down your face even when you're running in hot conditions. No matter what sport you do, Tifosi has shades for you. Whether you love tennis, fishing, pickleball, running, cycling, or just hanging out on the beach. They are super reasonably priced, which I love, so I can have multiple pairs that go with any outfit. And of course, Feisty listeners get a special discount. So head on over to tifosioptics.com and use the code FM20. FM as in Feisty Media to get 20% off your order. That's FM20 at tifosioptics.com. I'll put a link in the show notes to make it easy for you.